Ladies and gentlemen, pleased to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Rob. Both Robs, actually. Yeah, this is like going back to old times. I remember meeting in the Dean's Board, OAC Dean's Boardroom in the 70s to look at leadership needs in Ontario. And we had done a survey and we found that 4-H was a good start on leadership. Junior farmers offered lots of programs on how to be a good secretary, how to be a good treasurer, how to be a chairman and hold meetings. But there really wasn't much opportunity in agriculture. You either took a degree or a diploma, but in terms of organizing agriculture, understanding the big picture, and learning about things outside your own line fence, there wasn't a lot of sort of executive training. And those first few meetings that we had between the OAC, OMAF, OFA, I was president of OFA at the time, and whatnot, we eventually, over the next 2 years, developed the ALP program. And we originally had applied to the Kellogg Foundation for funding because they were providing this all over the US. And it was looking very positive that we would get a grant from the Kellogg Foundation to start this Ag Leadership Program. And about 2 months before we sent the application in for funding to get this thing started, the Kellogg Foundation changed their criteria, and they would only fund things within the US or in developing countries, and Canada didn't qualify for a developing country. So we missed out on funding, so we had to go and raise our own funds, and the rest is history. So we go a long way back here, and that's one of the reasons why you sort of took me out of speaking retirement to come and make this presentation today. So, and I particularly appreciate having a partner in crime, Ken, because he's been a mentor of mine for a long time, and I've looked forward to him. There's no one better in Canada at forming partnerships between government and individuals and organizations, and he's expert at that. He knows both sides of the street there. So lessons in leadership, pretty wide open. What I've chosen is one, and anything that I've learned, most of it is that you need to focus. So focus or fade is my theme. Now, I have to learn how to use this thing, I guess. So let's get into it. So where does the need to focus apply? Got to turn some lights out. If you could leave one here, but maybe not. Do you need more lights out? That's okay, good. I want to be able to read here. So I think in my lifetime, and it's kind of scary, I've lived more years after I was OFA president than before. So, you know, talk about an old timer. I've learned lessons in organizations. I haven't been in politics, but I've observed politics like all of you. In business, probably where I learned my most lessons. But wherever you want to create something new and valuable and have people listen to you, you need to focus. My first lesson in focusing in organizations was in OFA. OFA, when I came through the ranks, was a pretty strident organization and loved to do demonstrations and knock processors on the head for not giving us more money and whatnot. But that wasn't me. I like to work with people to achieve mutually beneficial results. So I'm not I'm someone who enjoys working with people, but not against people. And so I changed the atmosphere of OFA to the extent that I could. So I started with commodity groups. Over a number of years, since OFA started in individual memberships, which I was there at the time. Well, I wasn't organizing at the time that was developed, but I remember it happening. The commodity groups were all in at first, but with all of the things going on, some of them were slipping away. So I met with them, took their interest into account, worked with them, and by the end of the 3 years when I was there, the commodity groups were all back in the fold. I set up the first producer-consumer liaison committee. And instead of battling between consumers and farmers, I very well remember we set up a committee between the two organizations, the Consumers Association, and every month we met to discuss issues, and I tried to improve relations there. And eventually it came to the point when food issues came to their attention, they would call us to get the farmer's perspective on it and go forward. Met with processors, farm supply people, urban groups. I would tell Rotary Club and Kiwanis Club members that I attended more Rotary Club meetings in a year than the members themselves did, because I was out speaking 5 to 8 times a week, and the family was at home, Sandra was looking after everything there, and I'd be away. And it's interesting to note technology. I would come home at the end of the week, and there'd be over 20 messages that I had received at home. Some of them kind of angry, some at 2 o'clock in the morning, but there was no message machine. The phone rang until you answered it. That's basically what it was, and nobody could leave a message. Look at how far we've come in messages. Wow. So anyway, I took a different focus. It changed the focus of the organization, and I think it still operates much to that way this year. Focus in politics. I've never been in politics, but let's look at it. When was the Quebec election? Do you remember? Yeah. April 7th. That's only 2 months ago, folks. Was there a focus in that election? What was the focus? The charter? That's supposed to be the focus. What ended up being the focus? Change. Un pays. Do you remember that fist pump? Un pays. So the Premier brought in Pellado, who was the richest man in Quebec, probably the most powerful person in Quebec. He was head of the internet, TV communications and everything. He had made his fortunes on the backs of Quebec people charging too much for these services. And yet he was revered as this great businessman and was the most powerful person in Quebec. And so she brought him in as a candidate, thinking we'll convince everybody that we're good business people. And on his introduction, he says, un pays, knowing that he was a separatist and wanted Quebec. So his goal was not just to get Quebec to separate. He was going to be premier. He wanted to go down in history like Johnny MacDonald starting a new country, and he wanted to be president of this new republic. And that became clear in that one statement. And so soon, Pauline Marois realized that she had attracted a monster into her camp. And the second thing was this great push. She wasn't going to let him talk about that. And I think it's kind of a sad commentary on politics that when very few people actually speak their mind. And when they do, they get in trouble. So in my mind, it was the focus of that debate that really caused the upset. And so it was a focus that, despite all of the parties spent months and years developing all this great policy and all of this stand, and everybody had their speaking notes, but one little remark, you realized really what they were looking at, and it changed the course of history there. So that's a focus, but a focus that really you didn't want to hear if you were the premier. Ontario election, what was the focus of the Ontario election? You remember there was one last week? You don't want to be a politician because they fade from memory really quickly.
100,000 jobs.
100,000 jobs being cut. Okay.
A million jobs.
Or a million new jobs.
Bad math.
Now,
Bad math.
and that is maybe what speaks to that election. The HUDAC did not have a focus. You can't come out and say 1 week, I'm going to cut 100,000 jobs. You browned off every civil servant, Every nurse and anybody who had a person that was sick and was afraid of the few nurses, everybody with kids in school thought their teachers were going to be cut. You could feel that 100,000 cut personally, but he came out with 1 million jobs, but it wasn't personal. He didn't go to the automobile and say, we're going to attract 3 more plants in this community so you can get a job. He didn't go to anywhere and say, so nobody could relate to the 1 million jobs personally, but they certainly could to the cuts. And the opposition, his opposition really pointed that out. So again, I think it's a lack of focus that had the result there. Okay, focus in business. I learned most of my lessons with First Line Seeds. And as you've heard before, it was 12 growers. We were browned off we were able to grow a good seed. We retailed some, but we had more and we wanted to wholesale it. And we were not happy selling through other companies the way they treated the seed. So we wanted to do our own company so that we could do research, quality control, and marketing, and have 12 of us all be uniform. To really do things together that we couldn't do as individuals. So the result, we thought, we're farmers, our neighbors will buy from us. Why would they go to a big company somewhere if we can provide it next door? But we really floundered for the first 10 years, and I didn't learn this message about focusing. We didn't understand our customers. We didn't focus on what our strengths were. We really didn't know what our strengths or weaknesses were. As it turned out, we had a lot of strengths, 12 farmers working together. Nobody knew the market as well as we did. We lived it every day. And so by 10 years, 92, we knew we needed a strategic plan because we were really in trouble. So we went about developing a strategic plan. We spent a whole year, everybody from our 12 shareholders to our management to all of our staff involved, looking at every aspect of the company, of the competition, and where we were going. And at the end, we understood a lot more about the seed business. We were farmers. We can grow it well, we can retail it. It can't be hard to wholesale it and get other people. That's easy. It turned out that it wasn't. So we looked at the whole thing and spent a year doing it. So what went well in that exercise was the involvement of all of our staff and shareholders. We really hadn't had an opportunity to do that as a total group and get everybody's input in before. So it was great team building, and it clarified the seed business for us. What didn't go well is we were too timid. We really didn't make aggressive enough moves to get ourselves out of financial trouble and to get a direction that we could go. And we didn't have a clear enough focus, so we had to go back at it because it wasn't going to solve our problems. So we spent another year, and we really concentrated on our strength with soybeans. We were all soybean growers. We knew more about growing soybeans and all of the diseases and everything. And we had, as a seed company then, been in liaison with other companies around the world. And so we understood the seed business a lot better. Soybeans were the lowest margin product we were selling at the time. So it was really risky to say we're going to concentrate on that, because the only source really was public soybeans. Any community, you would have 6 different sources for the same variety. So how can you make a profit? Because you knew if you came out with a price, somebody was going to undercut you. And because it was the same variety, there wasn't any great quality differentiation. So, but we said, that's what we do best. There was really no competitor who was an expert in soybeans. All of the big companies were corn seed companies. And oh yes, they had some soybeans too. Pioneer didn't even have a soybean breeder in Ontario. They brought in varieties from the US and tested them, picked the best ones out, and said that'll do. And so we came out with a new mission statement that garnered full support of everybody in our organization. So here was the mission statement. to be a progressive Ontario-based seed company dedicated to soybean expertise. That's all we were going to do. And we gradually, over a period of time, got rid of all of the other things. We had corn varieties and wheat varieties and barley varieties and alfalfa varieties, everything. But there wasn't a great focus to it, so we weren't good at anything. We were going to continue our first goal 10 years ago was quality products, crop research. We were going to continue that, but concentrate on innovation, bringing new things to Ontario, and developing new markets for specialized crop varieties. So that's what we really sharpened the focus of our whole company in order to survive and grow. So that was the mission, and for those of you familiar with strategy, you get the mission statement of what you want to achieve, and then you develop some strategy as how you're going to go about it. And so the next year, our strategy that we developed was, our main goal was to bring new technology into Canadian soybeans. And so we had already been in contact with companies all over the world and knew what was happening in the rest of the world. And so we followed particular U.S. developments, incorporated new traits into first-line varieties. And at that point, at that stage, Canadian traits, whether it was a disease resistance or something, was taking 5 to 7 years to come into Ontario, because all of the big companies were based in the States. They had to prove it where there was 20 million acres of soybeans in Iowa or Illinois, and then later start bringing it into short season, and then the Canadian arm would get it. That was too long. So we looked at traits and had an idea that we would bring them and get them improved in Canada much quicker. And that's what happened, and that's still what's happening now. So, and then we sought a long-term technology supplier. So it's important to understand customers and focus on what their needs are. I put in this marketing strategy and promotion just as an interesting sideline so that you can understand where we were thinking. In the strategy, we realized it was difficult to beat number one. And at that point, Pioneer was number one in corn and had like 60 to 80% of the market. They were the strong leaders. And so we had been trying to sell seed corn, but realized that was not possible. So you have to choose a category carefully that does not just knock heads with number one. And since nobody was really experts in soybeans, we thought here's an opening that we could go into. And we really followed the model of the automobile industry. Some of you weren't even around, and some of you may remember that General Motors was the top company in North America and maybe the world. Japanese cars were a cheap knockoff. There was GM by a large margin, and then some Chrysler and Ford had a heck of a time competing with them and could not get the volume up. So Ford decided, we can't beat them on autos, let's take a new category and develop that market. So what did they do? They came out with the Ford pickup truck 150. That was in the early 90s. It's still the number one pickup truck today, and brought Ford out of the doldrums in major growth. So they painted them red, they put all kinds of chrome, they put the fancy interior, they put the double pipes on, and they really made it into a personal transportation vehicle instead of just a farm truck or a truck to be carrying stones and pipes, and you hardly ever wash them. And so that was, we modeled that. So what did Chrysler do? Well, we can't beat GM in cars, we can't beat Ford in their F-150, so they developed the minivan. And what an improvement over the old station wagons, you used to call them. And so they developed that for families. I have a theory on the pickup trucks. In the bird kingdom, it's the male that has the fancy tails. Look at the peacock and and they're always the brightest colors. Well, that's certainly not the case in the human area. So this pickup truck filled a void. So a teenager just loved to get into a bright red pickup truck with all the chrome on and the lights on and the things hanging in the pickup in the inside and tour up and down Main Street. So that was the sex symbol for the male human as opposed to the fancy feathers on And so anyway, that was an interesting way to look at the market. When we followed that, we went into soybeans because there was a big void there. Okay, I must get on here. I'm not leaving Ken any time. The second focus in business is because it's current, and I'll just talk to you briefly about it, but I'm on the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute. And a year ago, we became concerned about processed food. Within 8 years, the secondary processed food, this is not slaughtering pigs, it's making bacon and sausage and things from them, has a deficit in Canada, went from $1 billion deficit to $6.5 billion deficit in about 8 years. That's a huge slide, and it continues to go down. And so we got alarmed, so we started a major research project. We involved business schools right across Canada. We have published about 20 reports, and the final report came out on Monday, the 16th. And we gave recommendations for various things. For governments, it was we should give greater recognition to the food processing industry as the largest manufacturing industry in Canada. And I was not aware, but the food processing in Canada is larger in both employment and dollars than the auto and aerospace industries combined. That is startling. Look at all the money and investment and things that they help the auto industry or the aerospace industry in Quebec. And here's the food processing industry, which kind of snuck in there. It's so widespread and so perverse, nobody really realized how big it was. And I think that's a useful message that we should remember. But why I bring it up here is that we also gave recommendations to companies what they need to do. And surprise, surprise, we did 13 case studies of food processors, small and large, across Canada. And we found on a major research project that the most successful companies had CEO or leadership that had leadership and clarity of purpose, which drives a strategy forward. In other words, you need somebody passionately driving towards that goal. Somebody really focusing on what the strengths of the company were and doing everything they can, getting all the support and driving that forward. And also in differentiating the company, its products, processes, and partnerships. In other words, you needed to establish a unique and differentiated category in the food processing industry. That's where the most successful companies were. Had you heard that before in this talk? and so that was released on Monday, and you can get it on their website. So that was the second business kind of example of needing to focus. So coming back to the beginning, I think that's probably the biggest lesson that I've learned, and it applies no matter what part of life. If you want to achieve something, then you really got to put your passion for it. You got to put all your effort. You have to understand where it is in the hierarchy of things, and what people will remember. If you don't focus and you do a little bit of everything, nobody will remember what you've done or see the results of it. But if you can really focus on even getting one thing done, then you'll make more strides and be a greater leader than if you don't. That was my experience anyway. Thank you.
When you look up agricultural leader in the dictionary, you get a picture of Peter Hannum. Right? You get a picture of Peter Hannum. And this is the first time in all the years that we've been working together that I've ever had a chance to be on a podium with him. And it's the first chance that I've ever been able to say at a podium with him how much I admire him. Peter Hannum wrote the book on agriculture and rural development in this province. And we're privileged, Peter, and thank you for being here today. And I know you don't like to do this stuff, right? So, lessons learned, and I'm gonna jump around. I'm gonna end. You got to remind me to end with Isabella's story because she helped me, granddaughter. But what I wanted to do was talk a little bit about agriculture, a little bit about the back, but mostly about next steps, picking up on what Peter has talked about, getting us to the point that we are today. So where do we go as rural leaders from here to then? I want to talk about agriculture as it relates to that. I want to talk about governments as it relates to that. And I want to talk about leadership as it relates to that. So that's sort of the sequence that Peter and I have in our program with you this morning. And it did occur to me, of course, that when Rob asked both of us to come, that he thought we were both so old that one of us might not be able to make it. And surprise, we're both here, Rob. We're both here. So government changes dramatically. Has since I began in the civil service in 1967, right? And I recall when I was first a branch director, it was 1982. Amber Gibbons Underwood died way too early. She was the editor of The Enthusiast, and she had me write as the brand new director in 1982. I think it was 82. We created ROS, Rural Organization Services Branch. We had a whole branch to support you guys in this room then, right? And my first lines in the director's first editorial were, "In these times of constraint." Right? 1982. And really, that's the constant of government. And despite all the politics, and we're going to get into that some more after Brent leaves, but I want to capture him here, right? We know there's not enough money to do things the way we've done them. We know that government's changing from a parent to a something else, and we're all trying to figure out what that is. But Brent, just take a minute and talk to us as the sponsor of most of the people in this room, right? What are you thinking in the ministry, not the politics of it? I know you don't have a ministry yet, so I know you don't have your letter yet that says, here's what we're going to do. What are you thinking?
So, and Ken and I were talking a little bit. You're always struggling with priorities in the ministry, just like you guys are, right? And there's dollars in there, and whether you like it or not, we are struggling with the dollars and resources we have. We are a ministry that has a tremendous traditional focus on agriculture. And even with the changes that happened recently through a minority government having 2 ministers and 2 ministries, what I observed there was starting to be a bit of a shift and a stronger focus on rural, right? And the challenge for us is trying to reach that balance and getting the right balance so that we're moving forward, we have enough of a focus that we are moving forward and not sliding back just to become, again, agriculture. And so, we were meeting with the deputy the other day, and some of those conversations, we were just sort of speculating and thinking, where are we moving, how are we moving forward, and how can we, from my perspective, start to move some of the resources and some of the shift to focus on where the jobs and the value added are. And you know, as Peter pointed out, it's not about traditionally just growing soybeans. It's about differentiating, about adding value. But also in ministry, ourselves, we need to go that way, but then do it in a very much in a way that is effective. And so for us on the rural side, a lot of it's working in building capacity, and so working with organizations in that. But it's a shift that needs to continue.
Good. Thank you. I know you've got to run and do a call, so good luck with it. Bring home the paycheck. So 3 things I want to cover then: agriculture, rural, governments related into those 2 things, and then leadership. Building on the notion that Peter has talked about for the last 2 generations, really, that we're, between the 2 of us, we're kind of thinking through today. Change is going to occur at a rate that is spastic in nature. Some of you have actually heard me say that before. It's not my quote. Somebody gave that to me as a notion in the mid-'80s. And I started using it in a lot of the after-dinner stuff that I was doing back at that stage of my career. What I didn't realize in the mid-'80s when I was giving that quote was that I was going to live through it. What I didn't realize was that we are now in that middle of that change that is happening so fast that it is spastic in nature. And that affects all of us and the organizations that each of you are responsible for here today, which is the third component. Well, let's think about agriculture for a short period of time. So Rob Black gave me a treat through your board, I think. Rob called me, I don't know when that was, but a while ago, and said, we want you to champion a study that we're doing on the future of leadership development. And of course, the word, you don't get asked to be a champion until you're old, Peter, right? So I'd never been asked to be a champion before. No, we don't want you to write it, he said, knowing that I wouldn't be able to hold a pen still, right? But I could interact and have conversations with people and try and gather as much as I could the wisdom of people as to what agriculture is doing and therefore what kind of agriculture leadership development we needed to have. And the focus was on ag leadership rather than rural in the grant that the ROI got to do that piece of work. What a privilege it was to go out and interview people, the folks that have made a difference over the last generation, the folks that we think are going to make a difference over the next generation, and think about where agriculture is headed. And in one phrase, I would suggest that in this case, size does matter. Almost to a person, the response was, larger is king. And with that, then we have to start measuring the effectiveness and the efficiency of large. And that's a model that's coming through this whole thing. Measuring your effectiveness and your efficiency as a human being and the organization that you represent here today. Because the guy that just left has to measure your effectiveness and your efficiency every time you make a grant application to his office along with his colleagues. So farmers then are looking at their effectiveness and their efficiency, and they're trying to figure out how all of that's going to work. And one of the things that when you get very large, you get staff to do things because you can't do it all yourself. And then one of the lessons on leadership that comes out of that, you go, well, wait a minute here. Rob, I think this was actually your idea when I interviewed you. Farmers aren't going to come to meetings anymore. They're going to send their GR guy to those meetings. Well, we haven't coped with that yet. We do that with the food processing tech sector. We can name the GR guys for the various big companies that represent their interests. Michael McCain doesn't come to a meeting to meet with government. Rory McAlpine does. Farmer X isn't going to come to the meetings and be involved in those things. Farmer X is going to have a staff member that does that. And how does that change the whole mix of how we make decisions in the agricultural community and in the rural community? A huge finding that we did through that. As agriculture becomes more sophisticated, they need less of the parental guidance they've had in the past from both government, but also from their own structures. We've seen this in the marketing of wheat. We don't need a marketing board for wheat. We're sophisticated enough to find our own export markets for wheat, and the wheat board is standing in our way. Let's merge the wheat board, the corn board, and the soybean board into one. More efficiency. And we'll have more effectiveness because we don't need all those services that we got from 3 different organizations in the past. So a lesson that we're gathering from the past, but thinking then in terms of where we go in the future. As we think about the past and the evolution of agriculture, we can easily determine in sort of generational chunks what the big advancement has been until we get to the one we're living in. So yeah, we had mechanical advantage, so that was the introduction of tractors, and that made things different. We had electrification of rural Ontario. What a difference that made, right? Including some stranded debt that still hangs around out there somewhere that you never see in any books, because we've got hydro lines going up every side road in this great province. Electrification was a big deal, and then the commercial application of fertilizer and herbicides and insecticides that came on in the next sort of 20 years. That was when Peter and his colleagues were doing their major thing around breeding, right? And then you've got the structures of marketing, the marketing boards, supply management, all those things that Bill Stewart, Minister of the day, brought in to help manage supply because farmers weren't making money because we had too much of everything. By the way, that changed 4-H and leadership development in a huge way, didn't it? The challenge of abundance changed the way that we actually provide leadership training in this province in a 2-paragraph segment in that report. We had too much of everything, including too many kids that wanted to farm. And we had to figure out how to get those kids off the farm. What a difference of 40 years. Now we're wondering how to get that generation into farming, right? So things change as you evolve in your leadership roles. The challenge that we have is we don't know what the generation that we're living in is going to say, this is what happened then. And it could be genomics. Can you imagine if you had all the genomics tools, how you would have fast-forwarded that breeding program that you did to export soybeans to Japan? Like, wow, right? It's got it easy now, haven't they, right? Could do things so much faster now, spastic in nature. Or we don't know if it's actual IT. Talked to a cancer researcher a while ago. He was asked a question, so what is the biggest advance in cancer research in the last 2 decades? His answer was the computer chip. Because it's around mining data. It's around providing things. It's about having a screen that actually works so people in the back of the room can see it at a meeting. All of those things are changing so quickly. And agriculture is the front of that. Agriculturalists don't drive tractors anymore. They sit in their cockpit and they work on their iPad or iPhone or BlackBerry while the tractor is being driven by the GPS and the computer system. More computer power in the tractor now than in the space thingamajig that landed on the moon. Think about that when you drive by the farmer that's going down the road to the next field. What does that farmer do while he's sitting there or she's sitting there? They've got time for leadership development. Are we taking advantage of that opportunity? They've got time to go to coffee, but they're not going to talk to coffee at the local coffee shop. They have their network across North America or the world that they're having coffee with as they sit there. They're creating clubs just like Peter did 30 years ago. Am I right? 30? I'm just going back in time, right? Where he created a club. Not that they were competing, they actually got together and worked. And that's happening in spades now through people sitting in their machines, talking to others in a similar business, in a different locale, that can help them with the challenges that they are focusing on and with. All of those changes that are happening in agriculture bring about different risk management models. I was in Ottawa yesterday. In the parking lot of Ag Canada, I run into the Greenhouse Board. They're there to do something around label changes. They have a guy there from California. And I said, "Ooh, really? Guy from California. What are you doing up here, an expert witness?" And he said, "No, 90% of the growers that I'm working with are Canadian growers who are expanding into Northern California." Oh, really? Farmers are mitigating their risk by doing things in other countries and in other continents to mitigate risk. How does that do for our safety net programs? It makes you rethink all of those kinds of things as we think about the next 20 years and the next generation. Spastic in nature. And it brings together another thing. We are now well below. Who's here from government that can tell me what percentage of the population are actually farming now? I know it's less than 2, but I don't have good data. Anybody have it?
Less than 2.
Less than 2, thank you. Thank you, thank you. I think it's 1.2, but I'm not sure.
I'll see if I can Google it.
Yeah, Google it. That's it. Exactly it. Exactly. You'll have the answer before I get to the third component here. So with that, we are now a minority group, those of us that are involved in agriculture and in serving the agricultural community. We're a minority group, right? And how then do we brand ourselves so that the population who don't visit grandma's farm anymore actually understand what we're doing? And how do we influence the elected officials to make sure that our position is at the table for consideration? We're a minority group. And how do we brand ourselves? And I could tell you that in several pieces on the animal rights side in the last 6 months, this has been a story of despair. As we've moved from one commodity, a turkey getting beat over the head with a shovel, to chickens that are being thrown in scalding water, to cattle that are being lifted up by their neck by a chain, and we haven't got to the beef industry yet, I don't think, Rob, right? But how do we actually do branding, right? How do we do that in a way that it impacts the people that are the consumers of our program? All right, second thing. Oh, climate change. I got to hit that for a minute. Climate change. So John Oliver, one of the people I worship, along with Peter, is interested in climate change and water. I called John doing work on this piece of work for Rob, and he said, you do know, Ken, that we are moving south 12 kilometers every year. So when you're thinking about 20 years from now, we can grow cotton in southern Ontario. What about the north then, John? Oh, the north will be just exactly the spot to be. We've got 16 million acres in northern Ontario. Do anybody here know how many acres, you could Google it, we're farming in Ontario? Around 10 million. We've got more land waiting for us than we're actually farming. The challenge is that every generation, somebody decides we're going to clear that land, and every generation it grows back to poplars because it hasn't worked. The issue facing us from a leadership point of view and a policy point of view is now the time. Peter talked about processing. Absolutely. Premier Wynne, most of you would have heard her on CBC Radio this morning on your drive here. What example did she give about supporting the manufacturing? Food processing. The message from CAPI is getting to the Premier. And that means changing dynamics as to where the money is going to flow, guys, because there is no magic rainbow. If we're going to support food processing and keep it viable here, we have to do two things. Give them raw product. We have to do three. Give them labor that they can work with, and give them the support that they need financially to solve the rust out of their plants. That's going to make a difference on how the money flows out of the ministry or ministries over the next 4 years. So the north is an interesting challenge. Back to processing, we've got a plant just down the road here that is dark. It's built for 2 shifts. It doesn't work at all at night, and it's working 4 days a week, and the only way they can get to 4 full shifts is to kill cows. Well, wait a minute, we're killing the cows? That's like the golden egg, isn't it? Right? We need 100,000 more cows urgently to produce calves to satisfy the processors' needs here. Well, why wouldn't we do that in Northern Ontario? Where's the leadership development in Northern Ontario so that we can reach out to them and say, drive this thing, we're hungry for it. But you sure can't do that from Toronto. That isn't going to work, right? All those things are important for us to think about as we go. All right, technology. Okay, so here we go. I'm in the third component, leadership. Are you kicking me off yet? I'm okay? Yeah, it was a slow nod. Technology. So I'm amazed at how quickly all that's changing. We don't know where it's leading. We know that it is spastic in nature. I said to Rob when we were, how many?
So it's across Canada, 2.2% of all Canadians has moved from 1 to 3 Canadians living on the farm.
Sorry, louder?
Sorry. So it's 2.2% of the population of Canada are farming. It's moved from 1 in 3 Canadians farming to 1 in 46.
1 in 46. There we go. So thank you. See? Technology. How does it impact how we develop leaders? Technology, mind-boggling. My granddaughter, on her iPad, has more power in it than the space shuttle. She thinks in bits and bytes and whatever it is, that all these short bytes. They do not attend week-long junior farmer camp that we used to do, Janet, when we were kids. You'll never get their attention for a week-long program. How are you going to develop those leaders and have the efficiency and the effectiveness in that leadership development to keep them interested? Lyle Van Cleef, one of the guys I interviewed, former Minister of Agriculture, and another guy that helped start the Advanced Ag Leadership Program back in the mid-70s, he said, well, Ken, 4-H is a great starter. This was like 3 months ago. It's a great starter. But when I was a 4-H leader in Prince Edward County, we had a whole busload of kids on my side road. I'm trying to sound like Lyle because he has a bit of a drawl. A whole busload on my road. And now there are 3 kids get on the bus. So where are we going to find the root stock that we have used to develop the agriculture and rural leaders if they're not going to attend 4-H? Or how does 4-H change itself to accomplish and get a critical mass of members? And I know that those involved in 4-H are working on that. In order to deal with the efficiency and the effectiveness, we have to work together. This is my parting shot, by the way. We've seen government move from, oh, I didn't do that slide. You want to do it? You got time? This is a piece on the 2% piece, but it's also our impact politically. I moved by that too quickly. What do you got there, Rob? This is
last week's election.
This is last week's election, right? And give us the colors, because they really can't see at the back. Sorry.
So there's the NDP in the north, and that's red actually on the screen in the Thunder Bay.
So Rainy River is Liberal.
Yeah, that's red. And then down in the GTA is red, right out to Milton. The rest is blue.
Right. So here we are. We're a minority group, and we're represented by the opposition. Interesting paradigm for all of us in the rural Ontario business, isn't it? Now go back to when Peterson, and thanks for doing these slides. So talk to us.
So the province divided out into quadrants, but anyways, the north is, you can see, is red and orange, Liberal, and with a few blue there, and then, but it's blue as well, it's all over, as is Liberal as well.
Yeah, so significant shift in where the Liberals are elected from when Peterson won that election in the mid-80s, right? Which was after 23 years or something or other of Tory rule in Ontario, right? So now we're a minority group and we are working with the opposition. How do we hone our message so that we get the things that we need in rural Ontario? I must say I was absolutely impressed with the Premier this morning. I'm not a politician. I've worked for all three parties. I have no partisan bone in my body. I was very impressed with her this morning, right? Because she talked about infrastructure, and during the big campaign war, I was thinking all that money is get the GTA vote, and we're not going to get the rural bridges we need, we're not going to get the rural hospital, we're not going to get the school system, all those things are going to be out. And she actually had a balance in that, those of you who heard this morning, as to the amount of money that's going to go outside the GTA and the amount of money that's going in GTA, right? So that's good for us. Well, how do we harness that, right? There's a campaign promise, she's meeting it, she's making it. What do we do about that from a rural organizational point of view? We need to be effective, we need to be efficient, we need to be focused. We need to work together. There are thousands, and I'm not exaggerating at all, there are thousands of non-for-profit organizations in Canada that cannot be supported. The model is not supportable, because most of those not-for-profits get greater than 50% of their revenue from the tax base. And governments in Canada can't continue to do it. And the pressure is going to be on us to find the effectiveness and the efficiency to make sure that we're survivors. There will be all sorts of takeovers. Some of them are going to be quiet mergers. Some of them are going to be strategic alliances, like this one, right? Where we've actually got people working together, trying to figure out how to do things more efficiently. And I absolutely, totally applaud you for doing what you're doing here today. We need to be focused. We need to work together for the future. And now I got to get to Isabella's book. So my granddaughter, I was working on this on Sunday, and she said, well, why don't you read this book? She's normally on her iPad. I was thrilled that she had picked it up. So be your name Buxbaum, or Bixby or Bray, or Mordecai, Ally, Van Allen, O'Shea. You're off to great places. Today is your day. Your mountain is waiting, so get on your way. Thank you.